is Dan Henk, another edition of the Skull Sessions, and today my guest is Frank Zafiro. Was that correct?
You got it.
And let's talk a little bit about what you got going on, Frank.
Well, what do you want to talk about? One of the things I've learned is I never quite know what it is that people are most interested in. Um, I was a police officer for 20 years in Spokane, Washington, and so it shouldn't come as any surprise to folks that a portion of what I write is crime fiction, and a portion of that is about police procedural sort of stories, following the cops as they try to fight crime, and while they're never perfect and don't always win, they're the good guys in those books. But given the focus of your show and the audience, what I think might be their preferences, maybe we should talk about the flip side of my catalog, where things get a little darker.
Well, I mean, dark is always good. I prefer dark. But you can talk about whatever you have going on, whatever is interesting, and any dark elements would be like a welcome addition.
Well, you can see the book cover over my shoulder right now on our Zoom meet here is For All the Forgotten Yesterdays. That's the most recent book in my flagship series, the River City series, which is a police procedural. So it does follow the cops. The cops are like I said, they're the good guys in these books. The core character of that series is a woman named Katie McLeod. She kind of came out of left field to become the core character by the third book in the series. And she's a detective now. She started life as a patrol officer in the series. And in this case, she's dealing with a couple of cases at once. One is a burglar who's breaking into the home of old folks at night to steal their meds and money. And he's pretty smart, and she's having a hard time catching him. And then in the middle of trying to do that, her boss hands her a cold case missing person that she doesn't know if that person is, just took off and is living somewhere else or is in a hole in the ground somewhere. And if either one, why, and who else was involved. And she stumbles on a couple of secrets that maybe she shouldn't know, and she's investigating that. And so even though they are, like I said, police procedurals, the cops are the good guys, certainly there's some darkness in them, some more than others. Some are a little less dark, but I dive into some dark stuff. The third book, for instance, is about a serial rapist, and we actually get a flashback section to his childhood and kind of see why he became who he is, and that's not for the faint of heart, for sure. That one's called Beneath a Weeping Sky. But that's definitely my best known series. But I do write some darker, different sort of stuff too. One that might appeal, I think, to some of your listeners. I wrote a series with Eric Beetner, who is a fantastic author, and he writes really dark crime fiction, like stuff that catches you by surprise. And he is a friend of mine that I wanted to write with for quite a while, and I kept bugging him, and I'd be like, let's write a book together, man, because I'd done it with a couple other authors as well. And he was like, yeah, I did that once and it worked out really well, and I think that's a rare thing, so I don't want to like screw up our friendship. It's almost like you're trying to date, right? Come on, let's go out for, I just don't want to ruin the friendship. So finally, though, I kept at him, and finally he rings me up one time and says, hey, we've been talking about writing together, and I always said I wouldn't. And I said, yeah, believe me, I know. He says, well, I actually have an idea that might work. And I said, hit me with it. And so he had this idea about the mob having to downsize, basically, during time period where there's some economic issues going on, and when he came up with the idea. And in the process of downsizing, they are asking their hitters, their muscle, to take care of some outstanding jobs, and whoever does the best at that will still have a job at the end of downsizing. The other person will be looking for new employment. And so this is what launched the series called the Brick and Cam Jobs. The first one is the backlist. And we wrote that in this alternating first person. I wrote the character of Bricks, and she's kind of a sarcastic daughter of a mafioso, and very much a planner and very meticulous. And then Eric wrote Cam, and Cam, his nickname pretty quickly becomes Slaughterhouse, which kind of tells you how his hits go. And we would write, a Bricks chapter or Cam chapter back and forth from their perspectives, and eventually, of course, they meet, and then you're getting the perspective of the other character from the other character, if that makes sense. There's a lot of dark.
Did you start out writing different sections for each character, and then you started merging it in more? So you wrote like little snippets of each character next to each other?
Well, it'd be a whole chapter per character,
Right.
and then and so in the first book, they're kind of they're on opposite paths, parallel paths for a while, so they don't even know each other exist. They're given this backlist of outstanding debts that need to be cleared. In other words, 3 hits each. And they set about doing these 3 hits, and the 3 don't cross each other. So the first half of the book is really just like almost like reading 2 separate books back and forth. Not a lot of overlapping characters. About midway through the book, or 2/3 of the way through the book, though, they meet. And once they meet, you start to see, Cam from Bricks's point of view, or Bricks from Cam's point of view in their respective chapters. And, we injected a lot of dark humor into this, a lot of, graveyard humor sort of thing, a lot of gallows humor. Bricks, it's usually sarcasm more often than not. Whereas with Cam, there's some gross out stuff that happens. And in all 3 of these books, Eric bested me easily in writing the scene that was both the grossest and the funniest. He has a real penchant for it. But these books there's a lot of action, a lot of dark, kind of gory stuff happens here and there. Not constant, but it's definitely there. But we don't lose our crime fiction roots either. I mean, it's definitely has its roots in.
I've heard that like whenever they're like mob movies, like everything from The Godfather to Goodfellas, like it's not like it makes a mob look better than they really are. Like they look more cohesive. They look more like they have an honestness. I've heard it's really like I would take your advice as a police officer who's probably dealt with this sort of stuff, but do you notice it's a little bit more like scattershot than it is in the movies?
Well, first off, you don't get that in these books for sure. They're not shown to be a well-oiled machine necessarily. But in answer to your question, one of the things you learn when you're doing police work is that just like there are all kinds of people, there are all kinds of criminals. And just like there are all kinds of criminals, there are all kinds of criminal organizations. And so to say the mafia is such a broad term, there are, families and crews within organized crime that are completely half-assed, idiots, right? And then there are some who are, they make the Robert De Niro character in Heat look like he's a bumbling idiot. They're very dialed in. And I think it I didn't work organized crime, so I can't speak with a degree of authority that, I don't want to misrepresent my expertise, but I think it has a lot to do with the leadership in whatever that group is. If the head of the crew or the head of the family is squared away in that regard, that tends to set the tone for the whole organization.
Do you feel that there's like a movie or representation that's kind of captured what you've experienced?
Well, as I said, I didn't really work organized crime. I mean, Spokane, Washington is in the eastern half of Washington State. The outlaw motorcycle gangs are probably the most prevalent. organized
Okay.
crime that we had there. The mafia. I'm not saying the mafia doesn't exist in Las Vegas and in Arizona and Chicago, but certainly it is more of a fixture on the eastern half of the country than on the western half. And
So it was
we
most of the crime in that area, like you're saying, it was like biker gangs and stuff like that.
well, biker gangs were there. Most of the crime, honestly, most of the crime that fell into one of two categories. Domestic violence. There's a lot of that, and then there was a lot of corollary crime to drug use. So, one of the downsides to, drugs being illegal is, people often do a lot of crime in order to support their drug habit. And so you've got, people's cars getting stolen or broken into, people's homes being broken into, their garages being broken into. Less frequently, but still sometimes you get robberies, whether that's an individual or 7-Eleven or something like that. These were probably the more common crimes that we dealt with, and usually there's usually an nexus to drugs, and for a long time that was either crack or meth. And near the end of my career, which I retired in 2013, heroin was definitely taking the place of crack and becoming.
Well, now here it's all fentanyl. It's like a fentanyl, like you don't even find
Mm,
heroin anymore. Everything's fentanyl.
mm. I believe it. I mean, that was becoming a problem when I left, and it looks like it's only gotten worse.
I did a guest spot in West Virginia, and they said, "You know what a West Virginia mating call is?" And they had a bottle of pills. And they shook a bottle of pills.
Well, I watched a really good documentary on HBO about the opioid crisis and how it did kind of have its beginnings there in West Virginia. And just, I mean, when you watch a criminal a documentary or even a dramatization, a movie about a drug lord, it's always greed, greed, greed. They want to own the blocks and sell all the crack, or sell the meth and make as much money as we can and be Tony Montana and all that.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say Scarface. Yeah.
But what I saw going on with the corporations in that documentary and what I've read subsequent to that, I mean, you want to talk about a horror show? I mean, that's pretty bad and pretty horrific to think that just to secure profits, we had a whole bunch of people being addicted to exposed and then addicted to this drug, and even when it became apparent that was what was happening and that it wasn't the panacea that everybody thought it was, the money was rolling in, and so nothing changed for quite some time. So, I mean, isn't that when you want to talk about true horror? I mean, human nature is it can be the most
What's
horrific
it?
thing.
Somebody makes a quote that humans are the real monsters.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you think about some of the things in the criminal world, what people have done, what I've seen people do to each other, and I'm not, I wasn't a homicide investigator, so I didn't go into all these grisly scenes constantly. I mean, I don't have that kind of an experience base. I've been to some, and I've walked in on some gnarly things while on patrol and in other capacities. But I mean, if something happens to you once or you see something once, it can have a profound impact on you, but you can chalk it up to an anomaly. This one time something bad happened and somebody was either a bad person or actually evil, or whatever however you want to frame it. But when you see it repeatedly by all kinds of different people from all different races and all different backgrounds and all different social strata and financial levels and everything, you start to kind of form an idea that one aspect of human nature can be pretty terrible. And you just like to hope that that's not the only aspect and not the one that wins out every time.
So, if your background history is being an officer and you write current fiction, but you also write sci-fi, is that correct? What
Yeah.
like pushed you into that genre?
Well, I grew up on sci-fi and fantasy. That was my jam for sure when I was a kid. Um, Probably more than almost to the exclusion of everything else. I loved the high fantasy of Tolkien and Lloyd Alexander and David Eddings was an author who was from Spokane, so it was exciting to read his work and think that could be me someday, because I knew I was going to be a writer from a very young age. And then of course on the sci-fi side, I loved Piers Anthony was one of my favorites, still is.
Oh, the book
And
cover
so
for him, yeah,
you did. Which
yeah,
one?
yeah. It's called the Sopass.
Say
It's
that
like
again. You broke up.
it's called the Sopass. It's like Sopaths. It's like apparently it was like a little bit more like I guess adult theme than a lot of his work. So he had like a smaller publisher put it
Yeah.
out, and they came to
Yeah.
me for the cover.
Yeah, the guy is a great example of somebody who's able to write. He's why I felt comfortable writing. Okay, I'm not just going to write police procedurals. I'm going to write private detective. I'm going to write hard boiled. I'm going to write these darker assassin books, and then think to myself, well, there's no reason I can't write science fiction. There's no reason I can't write about hockey. I mean, there's nothing holding back because Piers Anthony, he wrote fantasy like his Xanth series, which was just full of puns and other, sexually suggestive jokes and things like this. And then he wrote harder fantasy, grimmer fantasy, his Battle Circle trilogy, for example. And then he also wrote science fiction, and in science fiction he wrote everything from lighter, I think they'd almost probably call it paranormal or uh yeah, paranormal. He wrote this Incarnations of Immortality, which was all about like these like death was a character, and things like this, and these were uh adult, but they were a little lighter fare. And then probably my favorite work of his, series wise, he wrote a series called Bio of a Space Tyrant. This was originally a 5-book series about uh, a refugee who grows up to be essentially Caesar of the solar system. It's like takes place in 2700 year, several hundred years in the future. And the character's name is Hope Hubris, and it was an edgy book. I mean, I probably read it younger than I should have, because I think the first one came out when I was still late middle school, early high school, maybe. And there was a lot of violence and there was sexual assault and things like this. And but he's just, it was such a good writer and so able to write in all these different fashions, all these different styles and genres. I just always really admired him. The other thing that I admired about him was the way he handled his fans. I mean, when I was about 13 or so, I wrote a letter to him and sent it, and I got back a postcard. It was basically a 3x5 card with, treated as a postcard. And on the back of it, he typed a response, and it was a typewriter, an old style typewriter. There were cross outs when he made a mistake, and so obviously he just knocked it out really fast, but there was thought in it. Like, he answered my questions that I put in my letter, and told me about the next book coming out or whatever. And I ended up writing him a couple of letters, and then got a response both times. And I'd written to other authors, but you get back a form letter that their secretary wrote,
Right, right.
and this was different. And so that also impacted me. It made me think, if I ever become a writer that anybody knows about, I'm never going to forget, that every reader and every fan deserves your time.
Right.
They're the reason the book is out there, and not because you write for yourself. I mean, right? You write because it's a story that you have to tell. But if it was just for you, you'd never publish it.
But yeah,
So once
you
it's
also have
published,
to learn like what people want to hear. So it's not just like what you want to express, is what they also would, what they feel, what reacts with them.
yeah, and that connection is magical. I mean, that reader writer connection is to know that something came to be in your head, and you were somehow able to translate it through your fingers onto a page into words, and someone else read those words and they saw a picture pretty similar to the one in your head and dug it. They liked it. It moved them. It made them laugh, cry, be excited, be scared, be sad, whatever reaction you were going for. Hopefully, the one you were going for. That's pretty magical if you think about it, and that's why I enjoy the conferences that are fan based, reader based conferences. Those are the only ones I tend to go to because I just think that's a magical connection.
Okay, let's delve a little bit into like your writing process. Do you find it like more fulfilling to write like police procedural stuff or science fiction stuff? Do you like have different areas that you want to cover? Like for instance, I have a bunch of different interests, and like I feel like I have to feed all of them to feel fulfilled.
Yeah, that's the beauty though of having those different interests and having books in different genres or subgenres. I mean, I was working on the fifth book in my private investigator series, and I liked the story, and I finally figured out the right solution and the right twists for it. But I had this science fiction story that I was just bugging me. Like I'd written the first draft of it, and I wanted to revise it and get it up to where I can actually send it out for some feedback. And it just kept crowding out the private investigator series in that moment. And so I finally, okay, push pause here, pull out the sci-fi and get busy on it because that's what's speaking to me. And because I publish my own work, I have my own publishing imprint. I can do that because I'm not going to have an editor screaming at me, no, this Kopriva book needs to be done by November 1st, because it needs to go here and there. No, I can push the date back if I need to or want to. And this is the story that is making the most noise at the moment, not to the detriment of this other one. It's just a matter of timing. And then I can go from there to, a police procedural or a hard boiled, criminal based sort of story. And it keeps you fresh. I think it keeps you from being not even bored, but maybe bored's the only good word I can think of for it, or ground down by the similarity of the experience. I mean, if you write the same kind of book over and over again in a row, it doesn't matter if you love it and it's the greatest thing in the world. I mean, even your favorite song, if you heard it on repeat all day, you'd be sick of it, right?
Yeah.
And so this is kind of the same thing. But if you listen to,
Well, and you have bands that like do the same formula, album
right,
after album after album.
right, same thing, yeah. So you're tracking what I'm saying.
So let's go into your writing style a little bit. Do you prefer, like, I notice a lot of people, especially if they put out their own stuff, if they're independent, their own small label, they really like first person. Whereas I notice a lot of like Richard Matheson, Stephen King, like, more like long term, well established authors to like third person. Do you prefer one over the other?
I think the story dictates what the best approach is. I think a lot of writers, when they're younger writers, and that's not really your chronological age, but where you are in your writing journey. So newer writers, I guess, would be a better way to put it. They sometimes lean towards the first person, which is nothing wrong with it. I'd have to go through and look, but probably at least a third or or more of my books are first person. Um, and there's plenty of good reasons for writing in the first person, but I think sometimes early on writers will do that out of comfort,
It's
maybe.
too much of a default. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it just matters on. I mean, it's point of view, right? You recognize pretty early on. Okay, what's the best way to tell this story? Like the series with Eric Beetner that I mentioned earlier. The best way to tell that story was let's be in Brix's head while she's doing what she's doing, and let's be in Cam's head while he's doing what he's doing, and let's let them look at each other when their alternating chapters are intermingling, and that was the best way to tell it. But most of my procedurals, that would not be a very good way to tell it, and especially if you
Right.
want.
'Cause you need a little bit more of the omniscient, narrator to like kind of tell you like where stuff's leading and like other stuff that the character might not necessarily know, but the reader needs to know.
Right. And so and I'll be honest with you, I never write omniscient. I don't know. It's just me. There's nothing wrong with it. I don't like writing in that style, but third person limited with multiple perspectives is how I handle that. So you might have 5 points of view in this book, and maybe two of them are more prominent than the other three, but you're going to get the point of view in the third person from each of these five different characters. And that solves the problem that you're talking about. I mean, now, yeah, sure, Katie doesn't know this, but Ryan Mashad does, and so we're going to get that from him. And I love messing with perspective in terms of, it's cool to see characters through different eyes. Like if I were telling the story in the first person, me looking at you and describing my reaction to how you look, how you sound, what you say and do, that's one perspective that the reader gets. And that's the only one that they get. If there are multiple characters interacting with different characters, you can explore, like, one person thinks, oh yeah, he's whatever, he's a braggart and he's arrogant, and then somebody else looks at it and says, wow, what a confident guy. That's cool how confident he is. And somebody else, and so you get to explore nuance as opposed to black and white, this is the way that it is because only one character is looking at it. Because the reader is going to look at it, they're going to, that character is a filter for the reader, and then they're going to decide what their own assessment is of whatever they see. And so why not give them a few more perspectives to choose from before they draw their own conclusion? So I guess the short answer to your question is the story dictates it, and I probably prefer third person limited more these days, but not at the expense of what the story needs. If the story needs first person, you go with first person.
Well, I think definitely if it's like anything from like Lovecraft to like an alien invasion, or whatever, you kind of need that first person because you're like you don't you're experiencing everything for the first time, and there's no grand explanation of it, and there's kind of that scare in not knowing all of the details. But I feel like first person is kind of like the shaky cam of writing. Like it could be good, but it could be horrible.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote one of the series I write is called the Spokompton series, and it's from criminal viewpoint. It's all it's dark, it's gritty, and one of the books in that series is called Live and Die This Way, and it is about a burglar who is about a 25-ish-year-old woman who's very small. I mean, she can go in through pet doors. That's she's small enough to do that, and she's at the bottom of the food chain. She's got an addict brother, and she's on probation, and everybody is bigger and stronger than her, and she's trying to keep her head above the waterline, and her brothers as well. And telling that from the first person was the only choice as far as I saw it, because to really feel the anxiety, the constant anxiety, and then the absolute terror sometimes, and to really understand the vulnerability that she constantly experiences. I think you kind of have to be inside of her head in a first person view. So yeah, you're right. Shaky cam is it's a good analogy there, because it can be excellent or it can be distracting, and you can think to yourself, wow, the filmmaker really should have, used a tracking shot here.
Right.
So
Do you play around with the past versus present tense a little bit as well? Like, some people like they kind of like switch in and out, but like nobody does it like sentence to sentence because it becomes like too much of a jumble. Like the reader has a hard time making sense of it. But I feel like sometimes it's more necessary, and sometimes but there's a variety of different opinions of that.
yeah, it seems to be really, really, really trendy the last few years, especially, to write in the present tense. And I think people do that because it does create a sense of urgency, a sense of immediacy. And I totally get that. I'm a little too traditional, I guess, in that 90+% of the stuff I've written is in the past tense. That just is the way I write. And maybe I'd sell more if I wrote in the present tense. I wrote a series with a guy named Jim Wilski, called the Anya series, and it's a hard-boiled series of 4 books, and we did that same first-person alternating thing that I did with Eric, but to add another twist to it, Jim wrote his chapters in the present tense, and so you had no question whose chapter, whose point of view you were reading, because the character's name was at the beginning of the chapter, and then the style of writing was different, and then one was past tense and one was present tense. So it was a neat way to differentiate between those two.
Yeah, I feel like this kind of like the sound of the voice. Like I feel like there's a lot of tricks that you get with writing you wouldn't get elsewhere, like paragraph breaks and like separation. So you get emotion that you convey through through words, basically through words and like separations.
Yeah, you're absolutely bang on there, and finding which one is the best or most appropriate to achieve the goal that you're trying to achieve is the key. And sometimes you don't find it right away. Sometimes you find it in the editing process. Sometimes you find it, you get lucky and you find it first draft. You find it right away. It just, and sometimes it's one of those things too where it sounds pretentious, but in a way, sometimes writing can be like music. You kind of have to almost help it write itself down, as Joe Walsh once sang. You have to be open to that to that muse or whatever. I mean, I hate saying things like this because it sounds so pretentious.
It sounds like very like hippie dippy spiritual, but you do basically have to let the story talk through you as opposed to trying to direct everything.
Yeah, and I think in reality what's probably happening is, we as a species have been telling stories, since we were doing it around the campfire with grunts and banging rocks together for emphasis, right? So what makes a story work is part of our DNA. It really is. And so I think a writer who is, doing what I described is really just kind of trying to get in touch with that almost instinctive understanding of what makes a good story. And
I think it also feeds into the thing of you want whatever the readers want as opposed to just what you want to put out there.
Yeah, that's a tricky thing. I agree with that, and I disagree with it.
I'm not saying like multitude just what they want,
yeah.
the band selling out or whatever. I'm just talking about do something where it's it grabs the people as opposed to just you're like solipsism, and you're like by yourself thinking about what you want to hear, and you could care less what anybody else wants, and that might be too closed off.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. I think, and I'm just kind of pondering this as we're talking, but I think in the first draft of anything, you're better off leaning toward pleasing yourself and finding the story you want to tell and not worrying about the audience, and maybe not exclusively, but leaning that direction. And then when you get into the revision process, that's where I think you have to really think about the audience.
I think that's a good tip. Yeah. So
because you are
you
writing it
get
to be
down
heard.
like yeah, you get down like the core of your ideas and like what makes a story unique, and then you try and like meld it so it's receptive to other people, but it's still your idea.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and there are things that you might do in your story that, I mean, anything you do in your story, whether we're talking a short story or a novel or whatever it is, that reminds the reader that they're reading is a bad thing, right? So even if it's a great idea, I mean,
Like
I mean,
breaking that fourth wall, you mean?
yeah. Well, unless that's the whole point. I mean, unless you're doing Deadpool or something, right? I
Right,
mean,
right.
but yeah,
It works for
and
Deadpool, but it's like
it
shaving
totally
ham.
does.
Too many people do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Deadpool did it awesome. I love that those movies, and I even played the computer game, and that was pretty fun. And really, the early on, especially The Office, kind of did it in a nice little sly, subtle way. But you're right; it's no longer cutting edge or anything. That's for sure. The fourth wall breaks. Um, and there's an old, I mean, I know you've heard the term, kill your darlings. For those folks that don't know what that means, it's basically like no matter how much you love a passage or a phrase or a scene or even a character, if it doesn't serve the story,
Don't
then
use it. Yeah, yeah.
it has to go. It has to go. You have to kill your darlings, leave them by the side of the roads, and ultimately when readers get a hold of it, if you haven't killed those darlings, those are the things that they're going to point out as well. This could have been shorter if we didn't have to do this, we didn't have to do that. I mean, you mentioned Stephen King, who's one of my favorite writers, and he takes some hits sometimes for being a little overwrought or overlong,
I
and
think with his
maybe.
later work, especially like you read some of his earlier work, like Carrie or Christine or whatever. It seems a lot tighter. And then it seems as time has gone by, he's like. In fact, I took a writing seminar of his, like a 6 hour like writing is called On Writing. And it was like a lot of the things he talks about, he doesn't even do anymore. And I wish he did.
Well, I think two things happen when you write for decades professionally, right? One is you get better, and I think he has become a better writer on a technical level. I mean, some of his more recent work has been great. I just read Billy Summers recently, and I thought it was good. The other thing that happens is you get bigger. I mean, people I think are hesitant to. I mean, are you going to tell? Are you going to tell Keith Richards, which chord change to use? I mean, are you going to tell Stephen King to trim this here? I mean, there might be
Right.
editors he has that relationship with, and I hope so. But people, I think naturally are going to be thinking, well, he is who he
But I
is,
mean,
and
you could just keep
boom,
it. You can keep it in mind. Like one of my favorites is Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman has
Mhm.
only gotten better and smoother as time goes by, but his stuff didn't seem
Mhm.
like wordy and padded.
Yeah. No, I've read some of his stuff, and it is good as well. I think Joe Abercrombie is a good example of tight fantasy. I don't know if you're familiar with him or not. He writes Grimdark, the First Law trilogy, and actually now it's two trilogies and a 3-book interregnum, I guess, or whatever you want to call it, interlude. So like 9 books in this series. Very George R. R. Martin type of fantasy, I guess. But it's epic, but it's tight, and I like that. I like that kind of writing. But
On a side note, how bad did they ruin Game of Thrones?
at
At
the end, you mean?
the end, yeah, it was like the best thing ever until
Yeah.
they ran out of source material, and then yeah,
And we recently did a rewatch of that series. It's been like 3 years or something since the ending came out. Whatever it's been, I'd have to go look now. And we're like, well, let's see if it was as bad as we remember. And of course, then you're rewatching the early seasons, and they're just so fantastic. And honestly, I think the biggest mistake they made, granted, they had some issues when the source material ran out. You're absolutely right, but 7 episodes and 6 episodes, 13 episodes instead of 20. Imagine what character development could have occurred in those 7 lost
yeah.
episodes over those last 2 seasons. And even if these different characters end up in the same places in the books where they ended up in the show, because the character development will be there, I don't think it'll be nearly as dissatisfying
Yeah, I felt like you
as
just
it was.
crammed everything together in that last
Absolutely,
season.
they did.
It's like they mentioned the wall for 7 seasons, and then 8 season, one episode done. Like
Yeah,
winter's coming, winter's coming. Oh, now it's over.
yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, ideally, I think they would have dealt with the Night King and the White Walkers in season 7, and the entire season would have been dealing with that. And then season 8 would have been the end game conflict between the different factions that survived, or vice versa. Maybe, I mean, you can do it however you want, but 7 hours, 6.5 hours, whatever it would end up being with 7 episodes. There's a lot of room in there to do a lot of character development. And don't tell me that there wasn't room for that. I mean, there's such a rich palette to
Well, I
play
heard the
with.
writers, they got the contract for the new Star Wars, so they were trying to just like, oh, we're done with Game of Thrones. All right, we're out. And then they did
Yeah,
such
that's
a
actually,
bad, version
yeah,
of that last season that they got
yeah.
fired off Star Wars.
Yeah, that actually, I think if you look into that, you'll find that the timing of that is a little off. But the basic truth is there. They
Right.
were
Well,
done.
that's the
They were
rumor I
done.
heard.
Right.
So
Yeah, that's pretty widely believed. And but your the point is correct. They were done, and they wanted to hurry it up, and they did. They hurried it up. And as anything, whenever you do a job with an emphasis on getting it done fast, quality suffers, and
right.
that's what happened. HBO would have given them 10 seasons, easily. I mean, it was a huge moneymaker for them, and it only grew every year. But you talk about film and television. I mean, if you want to circle back to Stephen King for a second, I don't think I've ever seen a writer whose quality of writing is pretty consistent. I mean, within a bandwidth, but whose adaptations have been so wildly different. I mean, you've got your things like, I mean, I thought like Children of the Corn and these kinds of adaptations, Maximum Overdrive, they just sucked. They
Not so
just
great.
they sucked. And then there were those that were incredible.
Well, my favorite movie of all time. I knew he hates it, but like I know like when Stanley Kubrick did The Shining, and it wasn't his vision of The Shining. But I'm like, Stanley Kubrick is a master, so I don't necessarily take it as Stephen King Shining. I just think he did a great job of The Shining, and that's a great movie. And like I said, my favorite of all time.
What I liked about Doctor Sleep, the sequel film,
Oh, I love that too.
was
Yeah,
I liked how the director was able to pay homage to both the novel, the adaptation that he adapted it from, and the film. And that was a tightrope to walk. Is it Mike Flanagan? Was he the director of that? I'd have to double check. But whoever it was did a fantastic job walking that tightrope. And it can be tricky writing a sequel to something as iconic as The Shining this many years later. I mean, that was an early, late 70s, early 80s when that came out. And we're talking like 5 years ago, maybe, or less, when the sequel came out. I mean, I think I had a book come out in 2011 that I have the sequel coming out this year. So what's that? 12 years. That felt like a long time to go from the first book in a series to the second
2011
book.
is when they put out my first book.
Yeah, yeah. So imagine did you write a sequel to it, or is it a standalone?
It's no, it's like originally I wanted to be a comic artist, so I kind of keep in mind that like everything kind of happens in a vaguely the same continuity. So like I've written other stuff, and like one is more or less a direct sequel to the first one, but it's like Mad Max Road Warrior. It's like you don't have to read one to read the other.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, imagine if you'd waited 12 years in between those. but but I mean, that's the nice thing, I suppose, about, I mean, I think with the book coming out in December, that'll be my 47th book. That not all crime fiction, but overall.
Wow,
And
is it all the same publisher? Is it all available through the same platforms?
I right now I've got all the rights back to all of them except for one series that I created and edited and contributed to, that Down and Out Books has. That's a novella series. But outside of those 6 novellas that are part of that series, I got back the rights to everything, and so it's all published under Code 4 Press, which is just my own personal imprint. And that, the nice part about that is any marketing that I do can be, catalog wide if I want it to be. You get that latitude. But the other nice part about it is that it's a lot of different sandboxes to go play in. And so if you're in the mood for, certain kind of storytelling, or a certain kind of story jumps in your head, it might fit really well in one of those existing sandboxes. And so, I mean, I've never been bored when it comes to writing. Just never, it's never been a problem.
Yeah, people ask me, they're like, where do your ideas come from? I'm like, I have more ideas than I can put on paper.
Yeah, that's, ideas are never the problem.
Yeah.
It's making them viable and then getting them written. And I used to think, well, I want to get all these stories written, and I had this idea that there'd be a point at which all the stories were written, and then I'll worry about what happens next after that. And then, pretty soon, pretty early on, you learn, oh yeah, you have 5 ideas, you write 2 of them. While you're writing those 2 and editing those 2 and thinking about those other 3, 10 more ideas come up. You throw 2 of those away, but that leaves 8, and pretty soon, I mean, I'm sure you're like me and like a lot of other authors, you've probably got a document or a notebook or something with
My
a whole
phone. I
bunch of
write notes
things.
on my phone.
There
Yeah.
you go. There you go. And if we were granted immortality, we'd never run out of stories. I mean, we'd always have a dozen stories that were going, me next, me next, me next. And that's the challenge, is deciding, which one is next. And the nice part about publishing independently is you get to decide. You absolutely get to decide, and you can change your mind if you absolutely want to. If something like a science fiction story, instead of the private investigator story, is the one that's screaming the loudest at the moment, well, maybe we're going to shuffle the line just a little bit. I mean, you don't want to make promises to your readers. This is coming out in February, and then you don't. But you have some latitude. It's nice to have that freedom and control.
Definitely. With you own your own Code 4 is like your own publishing like entity. Do you put anything else out, or is it mainly just you?
No, it's at the moment it's just me. I have 3 separate pen names, so it's nice to have an umbrella under which all of them are published. Um, I've thought about expanding into publishing other folks, but at the moment I wouldn't even have the time, even if I wanted to.
Well,
So
everyone says it's a risky gamble. Like I started my own company, and I got my rights back to some of my early stuff, and I love putting out my stuff because you don't have someone tell you no, you know.
yeah,
But I don't want to put out a bunch of other stuff because, like, if I screw up, if I don't sell, if I poured all this time and money into it and didn't do well, at least I did it. If I do it for
yeah,
somebody else's work, I feel I let them down, I let myself down. So yeah, it
yeah.
could be a whole nightmare.
Yeah, and I've got 2 things going on that keep, that kind of, I guess, scratch that itch anyway. One is, I mean, I collaborated on about 15 of the books that I've written with other authors. and I have one series that's still an open series that we're adding books to periodically, the Charlie 316 series. And so, I get the collaboration itch scratch that way. And then I have a podcast as well that was on hiatus for about a year and a half, but I'm bringing it back in a little bit more limited form, called Wrong Place, Right Crime. Right crime
Okay.
as in right. And the whole purpose of that podcast, like 90% of it anyway, was to promote other authors, to do interviews like this, but be on your side of the microphone and to get their information. And
What's the right crime?
well, I the whole focus is on other crime fiction authors,
Right.
and so almost exclusively, and so there a lot of them are my peers and friends. I mean, it was a great opportunity to promote my friends, or to make other friends in the industry and promote them. And there's a 10% piece of it there too on the back end that's self promotion as well. I mean, your name is on it, your voice is there, you're associated with the person via that interview. So I mean, it doesn't hurt you from a marketing standpoint. But the main purpose, and when I edit it, the editing focus on the episode is to put the guest front and center and just get as much information out there to prospective readers who are listening. And so you talk about, if you put books out and they didn't do well, you'd feel like you let them down. I totally get that. By having the podcast, much like what you're doing here, you're doing a service to other authors and to readers out there who might be listening to a particular episode and they're like, oh, that actually sounds interesting to me, I'm going to check it out. You just help two people by having someone on your show and getting that result, the author obviously, but also the reader who gets to, I mean, what's more exciting than discovering a new author who you really dig? I mean, I've been late to the game on several things. Like I mentioned, Joe Abercrombie before. I mean, I think of the 9 books in that series, I think 7 or 8 were already out when I finally gave him a read. And people have been, talking about him for years and everything. But that sure was exciting when I started reading, the Blade itself, and it was dark and gritty and incredibly well written and atmospheric, and the world building wasn't in your face. It wasn't, let us spend the next 3 chapters of near textbook standard, learn about the world you're about to be in sort of world building. It was just, things are happening, characters are doing their things, and you pick up the world building as part of that experience. And it was exciting to learn something new. And I discovered him via somebody talking about him on a podcast. So I mean, what you're doing with your podcast is the same thing.
Well, thanks. Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff out there that people need to be exposed to because they don't even know it exists. I mean, how many authors are there? Like some write stuff that you might like more, some write stuff you might like less. But the like big production houses, they've kind of gone away. So unless you're like Stephen King or something like that, you don't really get the promo. So I guess you need things like this. So yeah, no, I enjoy doing it. I enjoy talking to people. I enjoy seeing what people have going on, what the process is. I try to take a little bit from the like John Stossel. I know when he makes his short videos, like he used to work in TV, so he likes to put lots of imagery in there and lots of props in there. And I feel like that helps to draw you in. Like I remember, like as a little kid, we lived on like isolated army bases. We had no TV, but I go to the library and I grab books to read. And the way I'd pick books is whoever had the coolest cover.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and I go home with this whole stack of books, and like maybe this much of them would be crap, but they'd all have these awesome
Yeah.
covers.
Yeah, and the whole thing of don't judge a book by its cover, that's one of those sayings that I think gets misunderstood, because you do
It's
judge a
one of
book
those
by its cover.
truisms. It's actually not a truism.
Yeah. Well, the deeper truth is, you could make that an actual deeper truth by adding one word to the saying, and that word is only. Don't judge a book
True. Yeah.
only by
Totally
its
true.
cover. Don't judge a person only by how they look or only by your first impressions of them.
Right.
But I mean, the cover is designed to tell you. I mean, for
You know,
those.
I think that's a good perspective. It's a good way of thinking of it. It's like, because you have like cues like, okay, this probably points towards this, but I don't know
Mhm.
for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing people see is the title, right? So the title needs to grab their attention and be something compelling. But the very next thing they're going to see is the cover, whether they're looking online or they're at the library, and the cover should give you an idea what the book's about. If for if you look over my shoulder, you got a pretty good idea what's going on in All the Forgotten Yesterdays, because here's a guy all in black who's jamming his fist through a window pane and reaching through to unlock the door there. That gives you a pretty good idea what's going on in that book. And so it would be misleading, I think, to have a cover that doesn't match the book. In fact, that kind of ticks readers off. They don't like it, and they're right to be mad about it.
Oh, you
um,
made me so mad. Like people like Frazetta, who's one of my favorites, who do these awesome covers. And then I remember later on, I was reading like books of it. It's like, yeah, I would never even read the story. I would just
right.
go, okay, I'll just do something. Sometimes it'd be way off. It'd be an amazing
Mm.
painting, but it had nothing to do with the novel.
Yeah, it's almost a promise, or maybe something short of a promise, but in that vein, to the reader. When they look at your book cover, they should be unsurprised by the kind of story that they get. And when they read the description on the back, or next to it, if you're online, they should get something in the vein of what you describe. I mean, it's dirty pool to do it any differently.
Dirty
And
boy.
I mean, and I'm not saying you can't have twists. I love twists. I love
Right.
surprises. I love to be surprised by the events and how they go. But you don't want to pick up,
No, but
you
I'm talking
know,
about like when they picture a scene that's actually not in the book.
or even close to the style. I mean,
Yeah.
you mentioned Frazetta, and the kind of muscly warriors and buxom women that he would draw. Uh, that evokes a particular kind of fantasy, and if you get into the book itself and it's completely different, it's more like a cozy mystery almost.
Right.
That's I mean, readers aren't going to like that.
It
And
also
like,
doesn't do the book any favors because the people that might
no,
like that more tame outlook on stuff are not going to pick it up in the first place.
right, and the people who want what the cover tells you they're going to get are going to be disappointed. So you're going to not get the readers that you want, and you're going to make angry the readers you do get. And so good luck with your star rating on any of those
I
platforms.
think that was kind of the era. I mean, that was before social media, so star ratings didn't really matter. I think that was more like, hey, who's the hot new artist? Okay, he should do a cover.
Yeah,
Instead.
I think you're right. And what it comes down to is, like, sometimes the marketing people and the creative people don't see the world the same way, and sometimes that's good, because the marketing
Well,
people,
quite
if they're
often the
good,
marketing people don't see it the same way.
well, if and I mean, as an independent author, I've had to do marketing, and so it's not like I don't know what I'm doing,
Yeah,
but
but
I
you're
don't.
marketing your stuff, right?
Right, but I don't know marketing as well as a marketing professional.
Right.
And uh, but sometimes they can't get out of their own way. Like, to them, the end result that they're looking for is to get somebody to purchase that product, and that's all fine and good. And the attitude, let's do what we need to do to make that happen, and then they can do a very good job of accomplishing that. But as a writer, I mean, you've not just written one book, you've written multiple books. I've written multiple books. Most authors, or many authors, do. And it, so it's a relationship with your readers that you're looking for. You want them to come back and read the next book and the book after that, and even jump from one series to another, even if it's a slightly different genre. Maybe I would love people who read my River City books to try out my science fiction, that I'm working on. And then that might not be something they're normally interested in, but if you have a good relationship with your readers, they might give you a try. If you put together a book, no matter how good that book might be, and it's misrepresented by the cover and the description and the marketing, yeah, they might buy that first book. You might get your money from that first purchase, but the relationship is toast. And they're not going to read another book in that series. They're certainly not going to trust you enough to try a different genre or subgenre of what you've written. And so that's
No,
where I think
I totally
sometimes the
agree. Yeah.
marketing, the marketing folks and the creative folks maybe don't
And
always
odds a
see it the
little bit.
same way.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, a smart marketing person knows this, and they're gonna adhere to this principle. But some
It
places
also
it's
seems like the new hot thing is like I can make money off marketing. So like I'll put something out and I'll start promoting it and I'll have like it's like roaches, they swarm in and everyone wants to market for you. I'm like, let me see
yeah,
some tear sheets. Let me see some proven work you've done for authors I like, and then I'll think about it. They're like, oh
yeah,
well, I did this. It's like that
yeah.
has nothing to do with it. Go away. Leave me alone.
Well, when I was first getting into the business side of this, in my early 20s, and the scams that were prevalent were straight up vanity presses where they
Right.
would publish your book and then get you to buy 5,000 copies of it. And that's where they made their money. And so it was a scam. And then also scam agents who would say, yeah, I'll be your agent, but you have to pay me up front because I have expenses. And if you want me to get you a deal, I have to be able to keep the lights on. And so those would be the two scams. And people would constantly have to remind authors, look, money flows to the author. That's how this works. So don't go in for those scams. Well, with the advent of self-publishing, which I would say has, for many people, developed into what I would call independent publishing, which is a higher degree of professionalism. It's still technically self-publishing, so folks don't think I'm talking about something completely different. It's just a matter of quality. The scams have changed. Now the scams are, let me set you up for a blog tour. Let me, market you to my 50,000 Twitter followers. And, really 49,500 of those are bots who aren't going to buy my book,
Right.
and so the scams have changed, but of course the target is still, the author's still the target there. And
It's a new
so
way to like excrete money from you. Yeah.
exactly. That's all it is. That's all it is. And so you you have to be careful because there are legitimate, if you publish your own work, if you're an independent publisher, an independent author, there are legitimate resources out there that you do need to pay money to use, that you should use, or that have, at least in the past, been effective. I mean, BookBub is a perfect example for someone to point to. Yeah, BookBub costs money for you to get on that mailing list and for your book to go out to their mailing list, but it's legit and it's effective, and you should probably spend the money if it makes sense for you. But for every BookBub out there, there's dozens of scams too. And so weeding through those is actually more difficult than back in the day where it was like, oh, you want me to pay you money to buy my book? A vanity press, goodbye. Oh, you want me to pay you to represent me as an agent? Scam, goodbye. Now it's, you have to look a little closer and do a little more investigation to figure out, oh, okay, well, Fusty Librarian is a legit mailing list. I'm gonna put them in my maybe probably use stack, but a lot of these other ones over here are just inflated numbers that that don't do any good. And sometimes you have to try one to discover that's the case, and hopefully it's not a very expensive experiment for you, because if the result is poor, it's I have a friend who says it's not failure, it's feedback. So, I lost $30, but I learned that this particular advertiser does exactly
It's full
zero
of it.
for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but that's a whole other topic, of course, and probably not something we have time for.
All right. Well, speaking of time for, let's wrap things up. How can people get a hold of you? How can they buy your shit? How can they give you money? Do you have like a website?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. My crime fiction is at frankzafiro.com. And then I write mainstream work, including some middle grade hockey novels and some adult stuff and some comedy, kind of family drama comedy, I guess, under my real name, Frank Scalise, and that's at frankscalise.com. And then I haven't gotten my fantasy and sci-fi out yet, except for a short story that's in an anthology that is essentially the first chapter of my first fantasy book. But all of that is going to be coming out here in the next year or two, and that's under my pen name franksavario.net is where that's at. So any of those
Will that all
are
be
probably the
through
best
Code
place.
4? Like you putting out through your own company?
I don't have a code4press.com site set up. I bought the domain, but I'm thinking I'll probably get it set up here shortly, because I've got some other things going on that will give people an opportunity to perhaps buy direct if they want to. I haven't really announced this yet, so I don't want to let too much out of the bag, but I'm moving in that direction to having my work available through direct purchase
Do you
as
have
well.
a
If people are doing
website just for Code 4 Press, or is everything through your website?
the best place probably to start is the franksafiro.com website, and that'll link to the other websites are there, and ultimately when the store is up and running, the Code for Press store, that'll have all the other stuff. I mean, like I said, I haven't formally announced it yet, but cat's out of the bag, right?
Mm.
If folks want to
Is it
buy
all
stuff,
up on like Amazon or Barnes and Nobles?
yeah,
Like,
yeah. My all my work's up on Amazon. There's an author pages there for all the books. I was in Kindle Unlimited for everything for quite a while. I'm moving away from that. By the first of the year, I'll be wide again, so people can pick stuff up.
did you find that Kindle was a good thing for you? The Kindle Unlimited?
Yeah, yeah, it absolutely was for quite for some time. But the publishing marketplace, it just the landscape changes frequently and quickly, and so those marketing strategies that were working for me 2 years ago, 3 years ago, they stopped being as effective about a year ago, and so I've had to observe and collect data and think things through and decide on a new course of action to try to figure out what's working better now. And so my solution in the now here and now is all my work will be available wide again, so Barnes and Noble, Kobo, even the smaller ones as well. And I do audio too for most of my stuff, and so people can get on Chirp or Spotify or wherever you get audio, and get stuff in the audio version, which is kind of cool because like the odds of you or I getting our stuff picked up for film or TV, I mean, they exist, but that's always a long shot. But
Yeah, I've had people like talk to me about like buying one of my short stories, and then nothing ever happens.
that's the story. I mean, like that is a big thing if people even reach out, right? And then for it to get something done with it beyond that is such a huge long odds. But when somebody else performs your book on audio, that's kind of the it's kind of neat to see somebody interpret your work with their own art, which is narration. And so I've enjoyed whenever one of those titles is done, I proofread it, And that, it's actually kind of an enjoyable process because you hear the interpretation of your work by another artist, and it's not always the way you would have played it if you had,
Right.
but you don't have that skill set that those narrators do. And so I learned pretty early on not to get frustrated about it. Oh, wait, that's not the way I intended that, and just to look at how was the result. How did it end up? And so that's kind of fun. But those are available wherever
Yeah, I
you.
learned like the last thing that I'll say, but I learned like early on, like I was trying to like describe everything. I was like, you got because people interpret things differently, and
Mhm.
sometimes that interpretation helps them bond with the story. So
Yeah,
you got
yeah.
to like dial back the description a little bit.
Yeah, I've read some stuff where people describe literally everything, and there are readers who love that because then they can picture exactly what you intended. And so, if that works for you as a writer, that works for you as a reader, a salute, more power to you. What I noticed is I'm more like you. I like to leave some gaps for the reader to fill in. And I discovered one of the areas that I do that a lot in is with how characters look. I've not done a great job um, throughout the years in describing the physical appearance of most of my characters. I do describe and show more show than tell. I try to do what their character is like what their internal makeup is, what kind of person they are. Uh, I don't want there to be a lot of doubt as to that. But even like Katie McLeod, my core character in the River City series, if I ask different people what they think she looks like, I get radically different descriptions. Some of them are just descriptions. Some of them are this actress or that actress, or because I worked in police work for 2 decades, and I worked with women officers and other detectives and leaders, people who know me and know that environment will guess, oh, is this her or is this him, and so it's interesting to hear how radically different those guesses are because I didn't fill in the gaps about what Katie looks like or what or whatever. But there's no doubt who she is in terms of her character, in terms of her
People probably like
personality.
see the way that she acts, and they're like, "Oh, well, it's Sarah Connor or it's
Yeah,
Ripley."
yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's like
yeah.
because that's where the picture is like a strong female character,
Mhm.
but it might
Mhm.
not. But
I had a friend who was who did a lot of uh, beta reading for me, and he said he saw Rachel McAdams, and I didn't even know who that was at the time. And then True Detective season 2 came out, the much maligned season that would have been considered a great season of TV, I think, if it hadn't been under the True Detective umbrella.
yeah, but that
But
first one was so good. It's like it's so
best
hard
single
to yeah
season,
yeah
best single season of television ever.
yeah.
We could talk another hour just about that. But she played that, that character, one of the 4 characters on that season. And once I saw her in that role, I was like, oh yeah, I could totally see what he's talking about.
Yeah.
And so now I kind of see her a little bit, not exactly, but sort of someone who sort of looks like her when I write Katie. But my buddy Colin Conway, who I write the Troy 316 series with, he's the opposite. Like when he writes about a character, he gives a 2 or 3 line description that's very specific. And I actually kind of like that. Like, let's at least paint a let's get you can fill in the lines, but let me at least give you the outlines, and then you
Right,
can
right.
color in the rest. I was basically just giving you an empty piece of paper with the word that says, female officer, and then you have to decide what she looks like. And there's a happy medium there. So I do try to do like Colin does a little bit now and give people a slightly, it might be a fuzzy picture, but at least the outlines are there. And I think that because, like you said, I think that writer or the readers, they like to fill in the gaps a little bit based on their own perception, and I think that's okay. I think that's some.
I think it helps though if you give them like a little bit of something to base it off of.
Yeah, yeah.
Like you don't have to say, what socks the guy's wearing, what tie the guy's wearing, what everything. But if you kind of describe him a little bit, like, oh, it's a short guy with brown hair, or something, They just kind of like,
Yeah.
and then you can fill in the rest of the gaps.
Yeah, and what they're wearing tells you something about their character too, and so forth. And like you said, I think they enjoy filling in the gaps because the gaps that they fill in are going to be based on how they perceive this character. And so that's why it's interesting to hear how different people fill in those gaps differently.
Right.
Uh, but you're bang on. I agree. I agree with you.
Well, thank you. It's you you said you're being on a bunch of times. I feel complimented. But all right, man. So let's wrap this up. Is there anything that people need to know about how to get a hold of you? If they want a signed copy for your books, are you going to be at any events like any author signings or readings?
Yeah, the websites I mentioned are the best way. There's contact information on all of those. I am nowhere near popular enough that I don't answer reader email. I always do. Maybe
Well,
not
you said even
immediately,
Piers
but I
Anthony
always do.
answered you, so
Yeah, I mean I will always answer reader email based on the fact that when I was a 13-year-old kid, he did. And you can never pay, I can't pay him back for that, but I can certainly pay it forward. So if somebody has the inclination to write a note, they will always get a reply. Um, I'm doing a couple of events here locally. I'm in Central Oregon, near Bend, Oregon, and so there's going to be a couple of events in January that I'll be at. One at Roundabout Books in early January, and then another one at the Bend Athletic Club a little bit later in that month. And then I do go to the conferences. I go to the Left Coast Crime Conference. It'll be in Seattle this year. And I go to a conference called BoucherCon, which will be in Nashville this year. Those are kind of in the spring and the fall. I am going to start going to the 3C conference, I think, once my fantasy and sci-fi is out in the world, because that's a conference that focuses on multiple genres, both crime fiction and fantasy sci-fi and horror. And so it feels like it would be a good conference to touch on, more of the breadth of what I write rather than getting into the depth of it. So any of those places, I'd love to chat with you or anybody who recognizes me.
okay, awesome, man. And anything else you want to say? Before we wrap up, like any other way people should, see your stuff or get a hold of you, have like anything debuting, in like the next few weeks, the next few months.
That sequel that I wrote, that I mentioned, that was 12 years in the making, is called Some Kind of Hell. It's a sequel to The Last Horseman. It's kind of a thriller, an action thriller. That'll be dropping on December 12th. That'll probably be that's the next book that's coming out, probably by the time this podcast is available. And honestly, I would just encourage folks, if they think they like crime fiction, if you jump on my site, there's a which series is for you thing on the sidebar there, and you can pretty quickly kind of get a beat on what it is you like to read, to line up with what it is I might have that you might enjoy. But that's what you should do with any author, I think, is kind of just explore a little bit and see what meshes for you, and check it out, because you might be surprised. Something might surprise you that you didn't realize that you were drawn to it, and then you can discover a whole new author, a whole new series, or a whole new subgenre that you haven't really tried before.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, definitely check out our stuff, everyone. And thank you very much for being on this podcast. I know I'm a little slow today because I have a little bit of head cold, but I hope everything went down right. Do you have anything else that you want to add?
No, I just want to tell you thanks for a great conversation and for taking the time to have me on your show. I mentioned that I have a podcast myself, so I've been on your side of the microphone, and I know it's a lot of work, and I definitely appreciate you doing it.
Okay, thanks, man.